All right, we're rolling.
Excellent. 1975 gifted the world a treasure trove of iconic rock tracks. 1 year before, living life in the fast lane on their way to Hotel California, the Eagles were busy taking it to the limit. With a scintillating musical odyssey, Page, Plant, Bonham, and Jones ensured that the Indian region of Kashmir would forever be synonymous with getting the lead out. 2 years removed from taking us on a journey to the dark side of the moon, Pink Floyd wished you were here. For his true coming out party, Bruce Springsteen announced with confidence that he was born to run. Freddie Mercury cemented 3 legacies with Bohemian Rhapsody: his own, Queen's, and Galileo's. With Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham now members of Fleetwood Mac, not even a landslide could have brought them down. Kiss contrived the quintessential mission statement for their lifestyle, as their goal was to rock and roll all night and party every day. And Aerosmith gave guys all over America critical intel. If a woman tells you to walk a certain way, listen. The ragtag quintet burst onto the scene in 1973 with their self-titled debut album. Aerosmith's first and arguably biggest hit they would ever produce, Dream On, firmly planted them into the cultural conversation. Their propensity for blues riffs, teased out by their bar band persona, titillated music fans. And with the same old song and dance, they found success with their sophomore studio effort as well. The second album sounds a little bit more raunchy, more in tune with Joe's guitar. Aerosmith's voice, Steven Tyler, once said on the Joe Rogan Experience. And I think we found our sound on the second album. And with their sound and style now solidified, the bad boys from Boston pulled out all the bells, whistles, and harmonicas for their 1975 album, Toys in the Attic. After quieting down the frog in his throat and adding more sandpaper to his vocal delivery, Tyler concocted a potent combination of effects that would help drive Aerosmith for the next 5 decades. The charismatic and athletic frontman unleashed his full singing repertoire on this record. A drop to bluegrass blues, finding the rhythm of a sensual rocker, or a reveal of his intimate side he was not afraid to show. The second half of the Toxic Twins was lead guitarist and riff aficionado Joe Perry, driving the group's rhythm section with his heavy plucks, as well as ripping through intros and solos with intoxicating accuracy. Perry could drop down to a dirty 6-string shooter, produce a blues-infused riff, and add a delicate touch when needed. The formula of a sensational singer paired with a world-class guitar player was well established across the pond. Mick and Keith, Page and Plant, Daltrey and Townsend, Ozzy and Tony. But that dynamic had not quite yet taken off the same way in the States. Steven Tyler and Joe Perry sought to change that narrative. But Aerosmith would not have launched to stratospheric heights just as a dynamic duo. Tom Hamilton's groovy bass lines kept Aerosmith's heartbeat pumping, especially with a few key contributions on this album. Brad Whitford assisted immensely with an extra guitar layer and ensured Joe did not have all the fun in the studio or on stage. And Joey Kramer's impeccable timing and feel behind his drum kit helped drive the group's tenacious feel. Armed with multiple tracks that were destined to grace classic rock radio until the end of civilization, and would make countless of all-time music lists and rankings in perpetuity, as well as a slew of songs that would assist in cultivating Aerosmith's diverse catalog, the group was firmly planting their flag. The band's footprint on 70s culture was set in stone, but this record ensured Aerosmith would forever be considered rock and roll royalty. Hello, I am Chad Jones, and welcome to Don't Scratch the Vinyl, a music podcast where myself and occasionally a guest break down an iconic album in its entirety. This show both lays out the historical significance of the album and what music fans can take from this compilation today. I am recording this episode at Big Night Media's studio in Boston, Massachusetts. I was aware of Aerosmith pretty early on in my rock and roll consumption. I Don't Want to Miss a Thing was featured in the Will Ferrell movie, Blades of Glory. I had ears and was born in the 20th century, so naturally I was introduced to Dream On many times. And while that ballad and the emotional track, Janie's Got a Gun, were solidified in my iPod, I gravitated towards Aerosmith's more down and dirty rockin' hits. I practically had a fishing hook in my mouth, the way Walk This Way, Sweet Emotion, and Love in an Elevator had reeled me in. The nasty guitar licks and sleazy lyrics just grabbed me from the get-go, even if I did not understand all their innuendos. I had no idea why someone would want to go down on a muffin. I had zero grasp that there was more to a rabbit being dead than just simply an animal is no longer living. And the phrase, living it up when I'm going down, soared right over my head. Then, I would stumble upon Love in an Elevator's music video. And then it all started to make sense. My eardrums must be dented with tiny grooves from Aerosmith's riffs. In high school, listening to Steven Tyler shout out the chorus of Walk This Way and take in Joe Perry's masterclass guitar work on Sweet Emotion became a pretty consistent part of my schedule. As I was a member of the generation that started to get pretty comfortable downloading and playing a few songs from an artist over and over and over again, I got really familiar with these two tracks. They were a part of my life. While I was certainly not an expert in Aerosmith's entire catalog, I could not imagine existing without a few of their more well-known efforts. When Toys in the Attic turned 50 this past April, I listened to it a good amount to try to get a better feel for the album as a whole, and I increased my consumption recently in preparation for this episode. This record highlights the different elements people would latch onto when appreciating this band, and it makes sense why this album is considered by many to be Aerosmith's definitive compilation. Toys in the Attic starts off with a rousing title track, and it is a hell of a kickstart. The rock and riff is really fast-paced right from the start, and I love the drum components on the opener. There's also really good spacing throughout this record as you can appreciate the different musical components all working together as opposed to competing for the spotlight. And it's very, very prominent on this song. It's very well layered. And honestly, it's more manic than basically anything off Aerosmith's first two records. This was definitely the start of a new era for the band. Tyler gives a very breathy lyrical delivery, and it's just so enthralling. The musical acceleration right before the chorus gets me every time. The guitar solo from Perry is heavy, and it's gripping. And I love the intro when you're breaking into the chorus of toys, toys, toys in the attic, as the first part points out to something very sincere in this world, right? A child playing with its toy. There's very few things more pure than that environment, right? But then when he lines in with in the attic, there's a little bit more of a sinister edge to the delivery. Like, what's going on in the attic? And it just goes with the creepy images that are plastered on the album cover. I'll touch on more on that later on. The song is just so captivating with how Tyler and Perry just dance together so seamlessly, with the vocals and riffs playing off each other to an absolute T. One of the best parts of this song is also the build-up and release of tension. It's just so satisfying when it bleeds right into the chorus and just erupts. Excellent start to Toys in the Attic. Next up is titled Uncle Salty. And so this is where the tenor of the record slows down immediately with some very casual play. Tyler's vocals are more blues-centric, again, dropping down an octave for sure. And it gives off the vibe that Aerosmith was always really, really good at, sounding like the coolest, most talented bar band in all of history, especially after their first two records. They're definitely more blues-inspired than this one. There's a really good groove throughout this number, especially on the intro. And Tyler does a great job of holding on to the high notes for Insane, and then immediately dropping down lower for the verses. Just so effective how he's able to dance through the different levels of his voice. As it highlights throughout just how important Tyler's vocals are to Aerosmith. And I know a lot of people thinking like, well, yeah, that's obvious. But I think a lot of fans associate Aerosmith's vocals with being loud and screechy and very dominant, right? Very high-pitched. But Tyler was just as effective conveying Aerosmith's sound in a more relaxed blues bar environment. And here is a prime example of that. And I also like the line of, "It's a sunny day outside my window." It hits on a little bit of melancholy, right? As Tyler's sitting inside of his home, but he's, for whatever reason, not going outside, even though it's beautiful. I really think it was a smart idea also to put this second, as right after the fast-paced, high-tempo Toys in the Attic intro. This was here to remind their fans who were listening in 1975, and for the rest of the time, that Aerosmith was not completely abandoning their blues-centric ideas. All right, jumping to the third track off Toys in the Attic. It's titled Adam's Apple. There's a real slick opening riff from Perry, and there's another example of having the layers of the album really shine through. And the more I listened to this record, the more I anticipated the simple yet effective drum fill that Kramer has at the start of the song. As there's more times when I listened to it, the more I got really anticipation building for that part of it. And Steven Tyler's recant of the interesting Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden story from the Bible is quite fascinating. I love how he adds some extra venom in his vocals for the Lordy, it was love at first bite. There's some real tenacity pushed between those lyrics. And there's some mature play from Perry, yet still with some nice aggression from it as well. I like the percussions. They add a very key instrument addition to it, bringing up the track to another level. And then Joey Kramer with immaculate timing and execution behind the kit, just giving the song exactly what it needs for the entire time. And the song has a full instrumental break right in the middle, and it really adds to the layers throughout this entire record that they were able to just vibe as a group for those long solos. And it's sometimes nice to just tune out and just take in the music as an entire whole, where you're not necessarily analyzing all the different parts or elements, you're just letting the music wash over you. Again, really smart placement having this right after Uncle Salty. Now, jumping to one of the most iconic songs in Aerosmith's catalog. If you're listening to this, you definitely know this song, Walk This Way. So if you tuned out at any point during the last couple of songs and just let the music just kind of groove, Kramer's drums wake you up immediately from the start. Then one of the nastiest riffs in the history of the genre barrels down your ear canal. Joe Perry's lick has some edge to it, yet it's still playful. It's definitely sexy, but still has some danger behind it. And it's one of the intros I played the most in my head and through earbuds. That classic melody of da-na-na-na-na-na-na. I just get goosebumps even right now just saying it out loud. And then, of course, Tyler would not be denied. His vocals slide in to say hello. Great lines from the dad character in this story, as Tyler is in the start of either a relationship with someone he wants to be with or is already solidified in a relationship with a girl. And then the lines bellow out of, you ain't seen nothing till you're down on a muffin, and then you're sure to be a change in your ways. That's just dynamic songwriting right there. It took me a bit to actually notice that the father character in this story actually inspires the rest of the song's lyrics. And this is so interesting how this is a crazy tale in this song that is somehow a total fantasy, as I did not have a woman with a next door neighbor with a daughter who had a favor who just wanted to give me a little kiss. That did not happen in my life. But also the story is pretty relatable in a sense that when you're going into high school and you start wrestling with your emotions of dating and what it's like to really enter this stage of your life, you handle it a little bit better than you do when you're first going through puberty around middle school, right? But you still have that anxious feel of like, am I a high school loser who never made it with a lady till the boys told me something that I missed? And you're wrestling with that constant fear and anxiety that you just want to make sure you're doing it right. You don't want to make a fool of yourself. And that song really drives home that entire idea just masterfully. And also, on top of that, there's some pretty clever innuendos in this song. Singing "Hey Diddle Diddle" with your kitty in the middle is probably not about a cat. Unbelievable breathy lyrics from vocals that Tyler sounds like he was super close to the mic for this performance, and it catches it pretty clean. It's raunchy. This song is so down and dirty, but it's in the absolute best way possible. I love the bell getting run. It's such an ingenious touch to add that sound to this track. And then the mini solo from Perry with Tyler puncturing it with "like this" before Perry rips through the riff again. It's just extraordinary rock and roll. And the vocals are sung pretty fast. They're pretty clean. It can be a little hard to decipher exactly what he's saying the entire time, but he's giving great lift through the lyrics the entire way. And also, to me, I gotta be honest, this is an all-time top 25 song for me in any genre. I was actually just recently looking through my Apple Music playlist that keeps track of the songs and artists you've listened to the most in your time with the app. And I've had Apple Music for a few years, so it's not like I've had it for 20. But recently I was looking at it, and Walk This Way came in as the 23rd most played song since I've had the Apple Music on my phone. Right in between the Ramones' Pinhead and Van Halen's Feel Your Love Tonight. And honestly, I would say that this riff is a top 5 in the history of rock to me, and also when you're looking through the rest of the entire genre. If you're picking through the iconic riffs in rock history, I think you would put this way at the top. It's just intoxicating. It's what I want a classic rock song to be. And honestly, I never get tired of it. I never go through stages of my life when I don't want to hear Walk This Way every so often. I looked forward to it, especially every single time I played this record all the way through in preparation for this episode. Loved it. Absolutely adore this song. Now, jumping to the halfway point of Toys in the Attic. It's the only cover on the album titled Big 10-Inch Record. Now, this was originally written by Fred Weissmantel and recorded by Bull Moose Jackson in 1952. So you can only imagine the initial outrage of this song if you know anything about the lyrics that I'm about to go through. At one point, Tyler belts out, "But I really get her going when I whip out my big 10-inch record of a band that plays the blues," with the nice pause there to give it some extra thinking of like, what is he actually going to be saying in this line? Is he going to get arrested for indecency? And I also like how Tyler literally chuckles in multiple times when recording this song, as even he's acknowledging the absurdity of these lyrics, but they're still really fun. The swing element in this song is just incredible too. Adding the horns, the piano, the harmonica, it all is a great throwback to rock and roll at the start of the early 50s when it really became the genre that people would be able to latch onto as a cultural phenomenon. And I also really enjoy how Tyler really belts out the last portion of the song lyrics right after the solo. He gives his voice a little bit more of that Kermit the Frog drop-down effect. Now, obviously, this song got some criticism at the time, again, for being a little bit too much for 70s culture. But I can only imagine what it was like for Bull Moose Jackson to get heat from people in 1952 reading out these lyrics. But this is another example of Aerosmith paying homage to their blues roots, which is for sure part of their entire sound as a band. And also, it highlights that they were very creative when finding out double entendres in their lyrics, whether it was something that they wrote themselves or a throwback to a song that was already created. Now, jumping to, again, one of the most iconic 70s songs, Sweet Emotion. One of the most mesmerizing slow burns in rock's history. Tom Hamilton's bass line is rich. It's velvety. His tone adds a key layer of thickness to the music and also a longing in the song. There's just a great build of anticipation. Now, interesting, I researched this when going through the record, is that he actually introduced this riff to the band on one of the last days of recording Toys in the Attic. It was a jam day where just anybody was allowed to bring in any material that they haven't already put into a song. And thank God he didn't hold this in his back pocket. We would have been robbed of one of the best songs on this record and in Aerosmith's entire catalog. And so the group got away. They hammered away to create Sweet Emotion off that riff. I always thought the intro gives off vibes to like a great dramatic Western standoff. Like this is what I picture Wyatt Earp listening to before the OK Corral shootout to get in shape, right? And as a kid, I always thought that that rattling motion is actually a rattlesnake that they were able to capture for the song. And it's not, as Tyler was able to add not only key musical instruments to this song, but also a few non-traditional sounds that he was able to capture when he had to be creative. So the rattling sound is played from Tyler, known from an instrument called the vibraslap. And he actually admitted in an interview with Howard Stern that it broke during the recording and that sound actually made the final cut. You can kind of hear towards the end of the intro is that there's a time when the rattling kind of ends abruptly, and that's when the instrument just broke. It was a great addition to include that actually in the song, too. Now, that little rattling noise that you hear, the shaking, almost sounds like a maraca in this track, is actually Tyler shaking a sugar packet close to the microphone. As when they ordered the drum kit to create this song, they were expecting it to be having some maracas in the package as well. Now, when that didn't happen, again, pre-Amazon, he didn't know exactly what was going into your shipments, Tyler had to be creative. And what he found at the bottom of the package was a little sugar packet. And he decided to look at his engineer and was like, hey, turn the mic up. I got an idea. And that little rattling makes the song even more cool. This song just oozes cool throughout the entire number. Especially when Tyler's rattling off lines like, you talk about things that nobody cares. You're wearing out things that nobody wears. You're calling my name, but I gotta make it clear. I can't say baby where I'll be in a year. I mean, come on. That's Hall of Fame level stuff right there. This portion of Sweet Emotion is why I'm infatuated with rock music. You're looking to find out moments in songs that can really drive your intensity and emotion throughout. And that portion of this song really has always struck a chord with me, well before I even understood what rock music was. The music delivery, how the instruments intertwine, the dramatic pauses, it's just incredible. Joe Perry's riff throughout this song is also just astounding, especially when it erupts in between stanzas. Again, this song goes with feel so well and giving the guys time to have the music really speak for itself, and there's other times when Tyler's the one that's driving the song. And Aerosmith was so good throughout this entire record of giving everybody their chance to shine through. And then when you're busting out the sweet emotion line for about 8 seconds at a time. It's just amazing. Now, Tyler's a great storyteller throughout this song, and I kind of find it an underrated aspect of this track. As I was always really enthralled by the tale itself, I could have heard him go through multiple stanzas even more so after this. This song could have been 15 minutes of him with lyrics the whole time, and I would have been hooked. Now, it also introduced me to the idea of a rabbit helping prove if a woman was pregnant, whereas back in the day, they would inject a rabbit with the urine sample of a woman, and they would say that if the rabbit died, that meant she was pregnant. I guess in reality, the rabbit would have died anyway, but that was a part of the song that I had no idea about. I think I eventually had to ask my parents, like, what does it mean that a rabbit died? What does that have to do with anything in this? And I think this story touches on the idea of romanticizing the rock star lifestyle, right? Life could get grimy at times, but you're going to be free to live exciting moments throughout. Dealing with the cops, pregnancy scares, the unknown. In Aerosmith's mind, that's sure as hell better than living a regular, mundane life. Thank God Steven Tyler and Joe Perry weren't shackled to an office 9-to-5 job their whole lives. We all would have missed out on something. And then there's just an insane drum fill from Kramer right before we get to the final ending of the song with Perry just ripping his guitar to shreds for the ending. Incredible. When I would listen to this album in full to prepare for the show, I also found myself appreciating more of the end solo. It's such an immersive experience when you're listening to Toys in the Attic all the way through and just taking in all the little details throughout. All right, jumping to No More, No More, next song off Toys in the Attic. There's a very warm instrumental, and then Tyler really kicks it up with some snarls from his vocals. It's really up-tempo once he starts singing, and then the song just takes it to a whole other level. I really like the line, one of the best in the whole album, of, I ain't seen no daylight since we started this band. And I think that's more Tyler just being honest about what it's like to be in Aerosmith. He's not necessarily complaining about his lifestyle, but gotta be honest, right? If you're in Aerosmith, it's hard to take Sunday afternoon strolls through the park. It's not part of their lifestyle, right? And I really love the piano keys during the verses here. It really gives the song an extra pop that I find super effective. The chorus, yet simple, is one of the best in the whole album. Great job by Tyler of elongating more, giving it some real extra lift. And I find it noteworthy that when he says carriage the first time, he delivers the line pretty smoothly. And then by the time he gets to the end, when he hollers out carriage, he really spits behind it, adding some extra gusto, you know? And I always find it interesting that when you listen to a song more and more and you appreciate the differences that they have the same line, but it's how they enunciate it that makes it so different. I always find that really hooking in songs when you really start to figure out, like, okay, which one do you like better? And I like how he pronounces carriage towards the end with some real snarl behind it. The band does a great job of just playing off each other and Tyler. Again, there's great lift and energy for the verses, yet it simplifies during the chorus, allowing Tyler real room to move. And then it could slow down before picking the tempo right back up. Just the yo-yo effect that Aerosmith is really playing with this entire album is just so effective. And then the song gets a chance to show off the musicians' play. 100 seconds of Perry and Kramer just shredding and pounding their instruments to shreds. Incredible. Love the ending of this song. Jumping to Round and Round. So there's some prodding drums and deliberate at the start. It's a very threatening intro, honestly, and Perry and Kramer are just locked in and adding a pretty dark twist on the band's classic sound. This song honestly reminded me a lot of Black Sabbath when I was listening to it. It was like, okay, maybe this is Aerosmith's rendition of a heavy metal type song. And it honestly is pretty effective in conveying that message, as the music is much more eerie, more ominous than anything else on this record. There are intense moments throughout Toys in the Attic, no doubt, but this is as heavy as they would get. Tyler's vocals, they sound like they're double taped over, which I think works really well. It gives the song an extra layer of intensity that it really, really adds to the drive. And the wall of sound during the pre-chorus just completely engulfs you. I love these lines back to back of, 'cause the life I've been living and the love I've been given will be sure to send you spinning with your feet never touching the ground. Whoa. Awesome rock writing from Tyler here. And now it can be a little hard to tell exactly what the lyrics are, as the thick sound and the fast vocals don't necessarily lead it, so it's easy to tell exactly what he's saying. But when you slow it down and read it, you can hear the message that he's conveying again, touching on the rock and roll lifestyle. If you get involved with Tyler romantically, it's going to be a trip. Great melody throughout this song. The heavy beat throughout really drives it through. And this was honestly about as intense as Aerosmith ever really wanted to go, especially at this stage of their career. As if you listen to this song without knowing it and just listen to the music and you took out Tyler's vocals because his affectations would definitely give it away, you'd think this would be like a sludge metal song from the mid-70s. And then ending out with the round and round chorus being repeated in different ways and speeds towards the end. It almost gets hypnotic as we reach the climax. Very effective. Now, the closer off Toys in the Attic is a ballad titled You See Me Crying. Very emotional piano starts off the ending of Toys in the Attic. It really reminds me, honestly, of Motley Crue's Home Sweet Home, their famous ballad with the piano intro. And I'd be very curious to hear from those guys if they were inspired by this song and wanted to create a similar melody on their piano for their take on a ballad. And Tyler, man, Steven Tyler loves singing about crying, doesn't he? He gives a very sincere, touching performance throughout, as there's great drive when he belts out the lyrics of, honey, what have you done to your head? Sorry, honey, what you done to your head? He doesn't actually say have there, which makes it honestly more interesting that he doesn't say grammatically correct the entire time for this song. It gives some real interest of like, what is he exactly trying to convey? Honey was the words I said. And it sounds like he's really checking in on someone he cares about. And this is a little bit of a reality check from living that hard rock and roll lifestyle, you know? It's awesome when you're partying, you're hanging out on the tour, going out with different women, enjoying this party on stage and after party. But there are consequences that come with living that style, that if you get attached to someone, it's really hard to keep them going through this. And then towards the end, he makes a very interesting decision with his vocals of when he gets to the merry-go-round portion, he starts whining like a cat, and it gets to an incredibly high screech. And I just find it interesting that he was able to dive into that type of singing for such an emotional, deep song that he still wanted to hit the high notes as high as Mariah Carey. Now, Joe Perry, we got to talk about him on this song, as he really gets his guitar to bleed. He did a consistent, great job throughout Aerosmith's entire career of finding the touching side of his instrument for these types of ballads. As everyone knows, Aerosmith was super dialed in on singing these delicate songs and performing these emotional tracks. But none of that works if Joe Perry is still stuck as the awesome guitar shredding god that he was. He was able to milk out this emotion from his instrument that works incredibly well when Tyler decides to get more serious with his vocals. Everybody talks about Tyler's delivery on songs like Dream On, Janie's Got a Gun, You See Me Crying. But if Perry is not able to get to that side of his instrument for these songs, they're not as memorable. And that's important because that is maybe their most well-known attribute as an entire band, that people that don't necessarily know a lot about Aerosmith's entire career can point to those types of songs. And while this is not one of their most famous ballads, it's a very solid one, and it's a good finale for Toys in the Attic. All right, jumping to the categories here. So, I have to make this caveat. Obviously, it's pretty clear, I would assume, that I enjoy Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion immensely. I have personal connections to these songs. I'm fascinated with how they resonate in history. They're, to me, the most interesting, compelling, and memorable songs on this record, for sure. But for these categories, I did not just want to continue to pick between Toys in the Attic and Sweet Emotion the whole way, and Walk This Way. I had to make sure that I was including the other 6 songs on this record. As a huge part of this show is shining a light on very good but often overlooked tracks, in my opinion. So yes, those 2 songs and Toys in the Attic are definitely my top 3 on this record. This category and the other awards given will not just be picking between those 3 songs. I wanted to make that point clear as we go into the categories. All right, so Crank It Up to 11 in honor of that scene from Spinal Tap, right? Basically, this is the best portion of the album. What part makes you want to just crank up your dial, completely ignore everything else, and get lost in the music? And I decided to go with when Tyler starts the initial stanzas of singing Sweet Emotion and Perry is just destroying his guitar. I'm infatuated with that part of the song. I think it is honestly the best portion, as after we get through that intro tease, this part just erupts. And I was always so sitting and listening with just bated breath, waiting for Tyler to start shooting out those lyrics. It was close between this and something else off Walk This Way, but that song will be coordinated later on. You don't have to worry about that. But Sweet Emotions part, when they're Tyler and Perry, just showing why they're one of the best duos in the history of rock and roll with that song. That's a great one to point to, is showing off their chemistry. Now, reshuffling history. This is where I discuss the layout of the record and seeing if it could have been improved in any ways and what are the best parts of how the record flows all the way through from start to finish. So, start off with some positives. I love the high-flying tenacity that starts off with Toys in the Attic, as it showed that Aerosmith was entering a little bit more of an up-tempo era, but they were not going to completely go away from the bluegrass feel as the next song slows down with Uncle Salty. That was very smart. I also really found cool that they flank a really pretty dark song of Round and Round with their sweet You See Me Crying. I thought that was very cool to see the dichotomy of Aerosmith and to see why they were effective at not just playing one type of song for their career. Now, the one thing that I would have changed to this record to make it even more iconic was I would have ended it with Walk This Way going right into Sweet Emotion. And for a couple reasons. I think that when you pair two incredible songs really close to each other on an album is that they can often distract from other parts, either right before it, in the middle, or right after, right? And wedged in between Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion on Toys in the Attic is big 10-inch record. And I want people to appreciate that song listening to it as for what it is, not thinking like, cool, I'm still rattling from Walk This Way and just give me the Sweet Emotion at this point. I want to appreciate that on its own. And I think if you get through the entire record and then you're dropped the two iconic ones of Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion, it would have been an all-time ender. As I started to do some research of finding out what songs end an album that are really, really well known for the band, as not just one song ends in a record, right? Because that can be easy to find. For example, When the Levee Breaks ends Led Zeppelin 4. Phenomenal, right? But I was looking through of what two songs, what duos actually end a record. And a good example I found was the Rolling Stones' 1969 record, Let It Bleed. That ends with Monkey Man and You Can't Always Get What You Want, right? All-timer. And I think that Aerosmith's Toys in the Attic would have been even better had it ended with the incredible heart-pounding finish of Walk This Way going right into Sweet Emotion. And also, I'm a little bit biased, as I just heard those songs back-to-back so much in my life, again, listening to the iPod where you can pick and choose songs. And when I hear Walk This Way, I'm always just looking to hear Toys in the Attic right afterwards. So, reprogramming history. And this is just where I go through the album's ranking in time, especially considering what specific songs were the ones that have carried this throughout history, and what songs are maybe a little bit more underrated that didn't get the proper pub at the time, but are just as good as anything else. So, obviously I mentioned this theme a lot, right? A huge reason why this record lives on and is culturally relevant and still important for both the 70s time, rock and roll's history, and for today as showing the best of what a rock band can do, is because it includes Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion, right? It was very impressive how in real time, music directors at radio stations, fans, Aerosmith themselves were able to pinpoint that these two songs are going to be our meal ticket for this record. And also then throughout time, again, these were the songs that are mentioned in a huge moment for me was when I watched the VH1 100 and Greatest Hard Rock Songs when I was in like middle school, end of elementary school. And what made the top 10, I believe it was the 9th slot, was Walk This Way. And that signaled to me at this time, like, not only is this a good song, it's historically important. And to me, I always gravitate towards those songs on certain records, even if I don't necessarily love them the whole time, which again, for this one, I actually do. But I always want to know the real hits that are connected, not only just in real time, but throughout the next however long this record's been released for. And also, a huge reason why that Walk This Way has lived on so prominently is that in 1986, 11 years after it was released, Aerosmith teamed up with Run DMC to perform it for that famous music video. And I think that it just ingratiated them with a whole new audience. And it really helped the song take on a second massive, massive cultural significance to a whole new generation and audience. It made sense that that was the one that Run DMC and Aerosmith decided to team up and to create. Now, that is not to say the other 7 songs on this record are not great. They're just not quite as iconic, right? I actually think it would have been cool to hear Toys in the Attic, Adam's Apple, No More, No More, kind of mentioned in more all-time Aerosmith compilations. Those would have been fit in great on classic rock radio. They can crank them up a little bit more than what they do. But honestly, the critics in real time and in history got it right with anointing those 2 songs as the best off Toys in the Attic. And again, that's not always the case going throughout history. Maybe that's the songs that were most popular at the time have not necessarily aged the best or still mattered today. With Toys in the Attic, there's absolutely no question that Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion were the driving forces, both in 1975, 1985, and in 2025. And if I had to choose one song to help define this album the best, I would choose Walk This Way. This is very close between the two titans. But if someone asked me what record has the best songs of Aerosmith's entire catalog and what is the absolute song that defines them as a band, especially at this point of their career, I'm showing them Walk This Way. Now, that brings me to the awards. The Pulling Teeth Award for Underrated, Forgotten, Overlooked Track. This is in honor of the Pulling Teeth song that's off of Green Day's Dookie, which was wedged in between Welcome to Paradise and Basket Case, destined to be overlooked. So I wanted to highlight a couple songs on here that are just as good, that you really want to be able to highlight as being a huge part of Aerosmith's catalog, even if they're not quite as famous as Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion, right? They're still awesome rock songs. So I decided to go with Adam's Apple here. No More was close. It honestly came down to those two for this award. But I love the drive and the attitude from Tyler's vocals throughout. He gets so close to the microphone and it's really just bursting through. And there are more details that you just pick up on the more you listen to this song. I love the chemistry between Kramer and Perry on this track. Awesome. Adam's Apple, very underrated. This Ain't Havana Award for the song that blew you away, the most recent or first time you heard this record. So I decided to go with the title track, Toys in the Attic. I remembered a few years ago when I first started to listen to this record again, all the way through No Distractions, right? And my jaw dropped when I heard this song. It's like, where's this been my whole life? And as this award is honored for the Ramones song, This Ain't Havana, that I remember listening to End of the Century and just being completely blown away by This Ain't Havana. I'm like, I gotta get this downloaded on my phone. How have I been living my whole life without this song? And when I heard Toys in the Attic, I had the exact same reaction. And that's when I know a song really hits me, when that visceral reaction just strikes me right away, and it's instant. As there's songs for sure that I've had a slow burn with throughout my time listening, but I would say that the majority of the songs that I would say really high to me all time are ones that just struck me right away, that I can look back on thinking like, well, as soon as I was introduced to these songs, they would be a part of my life. And Toys in the Attic was the same way. As the other songs in this record, to a lesser extent, I eventually got to be really, really, really comfortable with listening to them all the way through for this record and started to appreciate all of them for what they are. But it took me a few listens for them to really, I think, understand and appreciate this album as a whole. Toys in the Attic, instant. Got it right away. And it became one of the songs that I immediately started putting in certain playlists and listening to it all the time. All right, so the Highway to Hell Award. Best Musical Intro. This is in honor of course, Angus Young's famous song with Bon Scott on the last record they did together. Now, this was a clear decision for me, as this song was actually on the short list of names that I thought about for the actual award of this. Walk This Way. It's melodic, it's nasty, it's fun, it's sensual, it's exciting. And it's one of the all-time favorite riffs in any part of any song. And especially with the drums adding to it, it just gives it an extra layer that I just find so enthralling every time I hear it. I really like Toys in the Attic's introduction. Adam's Apple is great, but this is Pantheon level stuff for me with Walk This Way. Not only just personally, but also in the annals of rock history. This is up there with anything you could come up with from the Stones or Led Zeppelin, any other shredding groups, right? Walk This Way has to be mentioned as a kick-ass intro. Jumping to the Lithium Award. Best opening line of a song. This is from the Nirvana record that had Lithium, which was Nevermind. And that single started off with, I'm so happy because today I found my friends. They're in my head. And so the winner for the best opening line off Toys in the Attic. No more, no more. Listen to this. Blood stains the ivories of my daddy's baby grand. And if I included the next one, it would be, I ain't seen no daylight since we started this band. Very descriptive. The imagery just floods out from that one. And if you look through the rest of the intros off Toys in the Attic, they're not always as descriptive. Honestly, sometimes they're very simple intros with the lyrics. The other ones that were obviously in contention are Walk This Way, but I didn't want to include that one for this award, right after including it for Highway to Hell. And also, Sweet Emotion one would be kind of cheating, because again, they start off with saying Sweet Emotion before they get into the stanzas. I love the intro for No More, No More. Very, very full. Love it from Tyler. The Eruption Award. Best Musical Extended Piece. So just no singing around for this one. And this is in honor of Eddie Van Halen's famous solo that was off Van Halen's first record. I decided to go with the end solo on Sweet Emotion. It's just so dramatic. It's endearing. And again, listening to this record in full, I started to get more appreciation for the little details that are added to this song, especially when you get to the crazy pounding of the drums from Kramer, and then Perry just goes otherworldly with his guitar play. And honestly, I started to really, really get through the lyrics and not just tune out, as I used to when I would listen to this song on its own. I would let the music just completely engulf me when listening to this album in full. And I started to honestly get a better feel for this song as an entire piece, not just the lyrics and not just the intro part of it. I'm really glad I started to get through and really not just tune out as much as I would before when I would hear this song. Love it even more so than I did before I started recording this and getting ready for this episode. So, jumping to tattoo or t-shirt. The winner here is very clear. I'm going with the record cover off Toys in the Attic. This would be a very cool thing that I would either permanently put on my body in a tattoo, probably not, but I would definitely rock this as a t-shirt. as the album cover has some very, you'd want to call them misfit toys, but again, on that famous Christmas movie, The Island of Misfit Toys, that they just had some defects. They weren't bad toys, right? The ones here look like they're plotting something really sinister, and it's quite unsettling seeing the dolls and figurines with those dead eyes that they have. Now, the one thing I would actually edit out to create a t-shirt or a cool sweatshirt for this album cover would be Aerosmith's name, as I love the design for clothes that don't include the band's name for them, like how on Dark Side of the Moon and Abbey Road, there's not even text in general, let alone you don't even know who the bands are. And then if you're rocking with this as a t-shirt, I would still have to include Toys in the Attic. It's literally a bunch of toys on the cover. I think it goes so well together. The font's really cool. That orange works together so well. It's honestly one of my favorite combos of an album title with the cover art. One of the best, honestly, that I would say, and personally for me. So, going to Nobody's Perfect. Now, this is a segment of the show where I talk about just like the one song that I either don't like, would not download as quickly, maybe I don't seek out as much to listen to on its own. And again, the more I listened to this record, I started to appreciate it in grander sense as an entire piece of art, not just the few hits or moments from this song, right? I would start to get a better feel for the whole entire set. And I would say, though, the one song that I would be just, again, least likely to seek out to listen to on its own would be Uncle Salty. It's not that I don't like it, for sure. It's a real cool grooving song, but I would just be least likely to download it as the song doesn't quite rock, and it's not quite as unique as the same way as the other ones on this record. Now, again, not to say I don't like it. I definitely appreciate it. But if I had to choose one for this category, I'm going to go with that one. All right, jumping to Almost Famous. Now, this is a piece for the show in honor of that awesome 2000 movie with Kate Hudson. This is basically my submission to Rolling Stone. And this is a piece that I write every single time showing why modern music fans should care about this record and this band, right? Now, this is titled After Something Said in a Movie, set a year after this record came out. This is titled Top Priority of the Summer. Most Americans regard the 70s as an entirely forgettable decade, wrote historian and Boston University professor Bruce Schulman in his book, The 70s. This impression could hardly be more wrong. I have to agree with my old college professor. After the radical haze of 1960s American politics started to clear up, the nation still had to come to grips with the consequences of the Watergate scandal and the Vietnam War's conclusion. With the film industry flooded with talent, Hollywood produced a plethora of iconic moments for the silver screen, from gritty, complex films such as Chinatown and The Godfather, to the invention of summer blockbuster franchises like Jaws and Star Wars. And in the middle of the decade, youth culture was caught at a crossroads, in between Ed Sullivan and MTV. Arguably, no better document captures this unique time in history, quite like Richard Linklater's 1993 film titled Dazed and Confused. This movie follows a collection of Texas teenagers enjoying the last day of school in May of 1976. This film has been lauded for decades now as capturing the spirit of what it was like to grow up in that era, with the characters never straying too far away from a joint or a beer and enjoying their evening aimlessly driving around, looking for the next party. But the most famous aspect of this movie, other than Matthew McConaughey's performance as Wooderson, possibly, are the songs woven throughout this film. Not to say the collection was perfect, as the project could not get a hold of Led Zeppelin's catalog due to licensing issues. Despite Page and Plant's notable absence, the film still landed some legendary tracks, even with the tunes taking up a significant portion of the film's budget. The Dazed and Confused soundtrack may as well be retitled The 70s Greatest Hits. Black Sabbath's Paranoid, Bob Dylan's Hurricane, Ted Nugent's Stranglehold, Kiss's Rock and Roll All Night, Alice Cooper's School's Out, Lynyrd Skynyrd's Tuesday Is Gone, The Runaways' Cherry Bomb, War's Low Rider, ZZ Top's Tush, Foghat's Slow Ride. I mean, we're talking 70s royalty here. But there's one song that not only kickstarted the movie, but the band who created the track would also be a driving force to help reveal a main character's true feelings. Before we're even done sitting through the studio logos flash onto the screen, Tom Hamilton's lavish bass line starts easing over the speakers. Then a tick before Tyler's vocals join the party, the film's first shot is revealed. An orange 1970 Pontiac GTO Judge cruises through a crowded high school parking lot. as Tyler and the rest of the boys start serenading the audience with that oh-so-sweet emotion. As the song blares, we see, among other things, a girl rolling a joint, a spray-painted message on blue lockers that reads, Senior 76, 4 guys passing a joint around, a guy checking out a girl while talking to another girl, literally waving his hand off to acknowledge she's not worth it, to then go back talking to the other girl, a guy drilling holes in a wooden paddle to make it more aerodynamic, guys betting on dice in the hallway, and 2 guys greet each other with a handshake that includes alluding to smoking a joint. That, my friends, is how you start a fucking movie. There are other awesome parts of this film where the song choice and the scene just go together hand in hand. Like when a car drives around with stolen statues who had their faces painted like the members of Kiss. Of course, Rock and Roll All Night comes on. Or when the middle school and high school bells ring out to officially ignite summer. Naturally, Alice Cooper starts growling about how school's out. But to lay the groundwork for this coming-of-age story set in mid-70s Texas, it just had to be Aerosmith. It fit the mold for the characters we were about to get to know over the next 103 minutes. One of the main people we hang out with is Randall Floyd, the star quarterback of the football team. The more we get to know him, the more we realize he's the man. He's having a great time and is cool with the jocks, stoners, intellectuals, and even the upcoming freshmen. I mean, his name in the movie is Randall Pink Floyd. Hard to get more cool. But throughout the film, he is wrestling with what he really wants going into his senior year and the rest of his life. His coach has ordered the players to sign a pledge. They will not consume any alcohol, do drugs, or partake in any other illegal activity. Pink does not want to submit so easily to these demands. However, his teammates are lobbying for him to just sign the contract. During one of the movie's final scenes, Pink and others get escorted off the football field by cops late at night for smoking weed. The football coach comes down and lambasts Pink for spending too much time with losers and not having his priorities in check. You know, coach, I gotta get going. Pink quips. Me and my loser friends, we gotta go get Aerosmith tickets. Top priority of the summer. He walks away and then turns to tell his coach he might play in the fall, but he would not sign the contract. Pink crumbles up the paper and throws it at his coach. I love how Pink specifically singled out he intended to buy Aerosmith tickets. He did not just say he planned on hitting up a concert, nor did he mention his interest in seeing another group. And it made sense that he said that band by name. They would have been the group to strike a chord with him during America's bicentennial summer. In a movie literally made to show what youth culture entailed in 70s America, Sweet Emotion sets the framework, and Aerosmith is used as a plot device. The film is set a year after Toys in the Attic was released, and at that time, Aerosmith would have been the American football players' favorite band, as well as the potheads, the cheerleaders would have loved them, and the outcasts would have flocked to see them in their summer concert to help commemorate their time enjoying the summer sun. Hard rockin' licks, vocals that could be blues-infused, dipped in honey, or down and dirty, and a rhythm section that knew how to groove. They did have something for everyone. And the decade many people consider the zenith of music, the Bad Boys from Boston were truly one of the titans. Thanks to Toys in the Attic, Tyler and Perry became the standard for frontman guitar player duos in American rock bands. They paved the way for other partnerships, such as Roth and Van Halen, and Axl and Slash, to flourish with that English formula. But a unique characteristic in Tyler and Perry's legacy is their relationship proved stable, despite infighting, substance abuse, and a changing musical landscape. Those two chugged along together. Of Aerosmith's 15 records, only one did not include both of the Toxic Twins. Perry did not play on 1982's Rockin' a Hard Place, as he was in the middle of a sabbatical away from the group. Perry left the band in 1979 to return in 1984, but that was it. That'd be the only time those two were not driving Aerosmith's sound. For decades, they produced and transcended hits beyond genre preferences, way beyond gender, and definitely beyond age. People who enjoyed all kinds of music could find something in Aerosmith's catalog that resonated with them. But this was all made possible after the group masterfully worked together to create one of the defining 70s albums. Toys in the Attic cemented Aerosmith within the music industry. And even if they were not always the most popular at all times, they were around in perpetuity. 50 years later, Toys in the Attic is archived as a pivotal resource in helping define and make sense of 70s America. And thanks to retrospective films like Dazed and Confused, we know what the era smelled like, weed. We know what the decade sounded like, bell-bottoms and colorful shirts. And we know what that time sounded like, Joe Perry's insatiable play and Steven Tyler's rambunctious whines. And that concludes it for the Aerosmith portion of this decade. As we're going to go into another part of the show now, though, I got to mention a little bit about Ozzy Osbourne. In between the Nirvana Unplugged episode and this recording, the world had to say goodbye to the legendary John Michael Osbourne. Ozzy passed away at the age of 76 on July 22nd. The word legend gets thrown around a lot in modern celebrity culture, but it truly is a fitting designation for Ozzy. The lead singer of the pioneering metal band Black Sabbath, the group burst onto the scene with their self-titled debut in 1970. One of the first big themes I heard about when I started to get really interested in learning about rock's history and its different eras was that the grunge movement hindered and some argued killed off hair metal in the early 90s. But I do not think Ozzy and Sabbath get enough credit historically for breaking rock out of the hippie, flower power era and ushering in a much darker, heavier, menacing style. In the late 60s, some of the most popular songs in rock were Cream's Sunshine of Your Love and the Beatles' Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Ozzy was not screeching about sunshine or marshmallow pies. One of their most famous records ended up being their second album, titled Paranoid. And on the title track, Ozzy belted out some of the most dire lyrics in rock's history. Make a joke, and I will sigh, and you will laugh, and I will cry. Happiness I cannot feel, and love to me is so unreal. Before I continue honoring Ozzy, I have a personal anecdote about this song. For the last 16 months, my dad, Kurt, was alive. He was on dialysis and had to be driven to and from the hospital 3 or 4 times a week for treatment. I was living at home and helped out when I could. So I spent a good amount of time with him while I played songs from my phone during the drive. He had told me years ago he had grown tired of a lot of old music, like many Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin songs, as he had been hearing them for over 50 years. But when Paranoid would come on, he told me he never got sick of it. He said he could remember listening to that song and other Black Sabbath tracks in his room, and that would freak out his mother. Now, with both my dad and Ozzy gone, I look forward to eventually playing Paranoid for my future kids, to teach them about what music their grandfather listened to, and to introduce them to Ozzy. In 1970, the Woodstock era of rock died when Ozzy spat those lines out in his truly one-of-a-kind voice. And a decade after helping create the foundation for heavy metal with Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward, Ozzy started one of the most successful second acts in music history. In 1980, he teamed up with Quiet Riot's guitar shredder, Randy Rhoads, and conjured up some of the most played rock songs of all time. Even with Randy tragically dying in a plane crash in 1982, Ozzy was able to again find 6-string shooters to intertwine with his unique howl. Those names included Jake E. Lee and Zakk Wylde. Throughout the decades, Ozzy always remained a part of culture, with his creation of Ozfest, starting his reality show The Osbournes, producing heartbreaking ballads in his 40s, the legendary stories involving fire ants, pigeons, and bats, raising $190 million for a charity concert less than a month before he would pass. He had zero interest in fading away. What stands out to me about his musical career was how he had a knack for making massive hits at different stages of his career, and in different ways, no less. Early 1970s with Black Sabbath, Paranoid, War Pigs, and Iron Man. Early 1980s solo with Randy Rhoads, Crazy Train, Mr. Crowley, and Flying High Again. Early 90s solo with Zakk Wylde, Mama, I'm Coming Home, and No More Tears. 3 of the most important 70s songs and concocted the heavy metal blueprint. Check. Helped kickstart the 1980s rock scene, which was a faster-paced era, yet still very intense with its sound. Check. Showed his vulnerable side and reminded the world he still was a force to be reckoned with all these years later. Check. Very few artists have ever smashed through the cultural zeitgeist in 3 separate decades. Ozzy accomplished the feat by writing 3 different chapters of his career, but he used the same pen and ink. When he passed, I was stunned to see some viral tweets of people admitting they did not know who Ozzy Osbourne was. I was just baffled. Paranoid had been played in a myriad of movies. He's a character in Motley Crue's The Dirt, which is on Netflix. How many times has Crazy Train been played at stadiums? The man was referenced in a Hannah Montana episode, for God's sake. I know I'm biased, as I literally host a music podcast, and my first 3 episodes have been discussing rock bands. But I feel everyone over the age of 12 would have at least heard the name Ozzy Osbourne. Growing up with 3 brothers and a dad who was born in the 50s, I'm going to be honest, I did not consume a lot of Madonna. But despite not having my mother blast Like a Virgin in our family Suburban a whole heck of a lot, I was pretty young when I learned who she was. To me, Ozzy is a part of the short list of musicians that you should just know by the time you reach a certain age, regardless of your music taste. And that will be a factor in Ozzy's legacy. His name, story, and influence will live on, as he will always be one of the key pillars in rock's history. Decades from now, Ozzy will be one of the names that many people will be able to identify as a rock star, even if they know almost nothing about the genre. Much like how even uncultured rock fans like myself know that Beethoven and Mozart created classical music. And that does it for this episode of Don't Scratch the Vinyl. Before I sign off, just a few housekeeping items. Please follow the show along on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at DSTVPod. So the initials for the show, Don't Scratch the Vinyl, and then pod, short for podcast. Facebook page is Don't Scratch the Vinyl Podcast. I'll be adding additional clips and content to those channels, especially now that I have the intro episode and 3 in the bank that I've already recorded. So I have 2 ideas for the next episode. If I'm again solo, I will be discussing The Offspring's Smash, which came out in 1994. I have another album that I'm just holding on to, seeing if I could eventually pin down a guest. If not, I always have that in my back pocket. So if I go with The Offspring, I'm really looking forward to diving back into their story, as I was very well aware of them early on in my life. They're actually from my neck of the woods in Southern California. And that show will be recorded sometime in the next couple of weeks. So thanks again for listening. I really do appreciate it. Hopefully you got something out of this show if you were either a longtime Aerosmith fan or did not know much about them before listening to this show. Please share along with family, friends. Every little bit helps as I continue to grow and refine this program. I hope I just did their story justice, as I know Aerosmith plays a key role in helping shape rock's history. Thanks again for hanging out and listening to me ramble about one of the best bands America has ever produced and one of my personal favorites. And remember this, please, above all else, if you take one thing from the show, remember, you rock, and don't let anyone ever tell you different.